If your QTHP hydraulic hand pump is having issues holding pressure, using the QTHP Replacement Parts Kit and some simple hand tools, you can service this pump in the field and get up and running again in a few minutes. If the pressure reading drops after pumping the QTHP, the internal temperature and ambient temperature may be equalizing, causing these readings to change. This is more likely to happen in colder environments, but after a minute or two, should begin to stabilize. If your QTHP is dropping pressure quickly and does not stabilize, or you're having issues priming the pump, that may mean your vent valve is not closed tightly. Tightening this should fix the issue. If that doesn't help, it may mean an O-ring seal or an internal check valve needs to be replaced. Let's go over how to check and replace the internal check valves and O-ring seals on the QTHP pump. To inspect the inlet check valve, start by draining any fluid you have in the pump reservoir. Using a 5/32 Allen wrench, remove the check valve. Be careful when removing this valve because there is a poppet and O-ring seal that is easy to lose if you are out in the field. Once disassembled, we can see the spring and poppet inside of the check valve. Make sure the spring is clear of dust and debris and in proper working order. If this spring is bent or broken, you can replace it with one from the Ralston QTHP Replacement Parts Kit. Next, we'll check the poppet and make sure there's no dust or debris inside or on the exterior of this poppet. If there's any damage to the poppet, make sure to replace it with a new one from the QTHP Replacement Parts Kit. Also, inspect the O-ring seals and make sure there's no dust or debris around these seals. Also, inspect the check valve for any damage or dust and debris around these O-ring seals. If there is any damage to these seals, make sure to put those to the side and use a new one from the QTHP Replacement Parts Kit. After inspecting the seals, it's also a good idea to apply a light bit of lubricant to these O-rings. We can now place the poppet back into the check valve, and we can place the spring back into the check valve. When replacing the spring back into the poppet, make sure this is not crooked, as if this is crooked, it may cause damage to the spring and not cause the poppet to properly seal against the check valve. Once this is back inside of the pump, we can test to ensure that our pump is holding pressure. If your pump is still losing pressure, you may need to replace the outlet port check valve or O-rings. First, we'll remove the reservoir vent plug and cap and chain on the outlet port. Make sure to drain any liquid from the reservoir and using a 5/8" wrench, remove the nut from the top of the reservoir. Then remove the top of the reservoir and then remove the reservoir. Using a 1/2" wrench, remove the outlet port stem. Be careful when removing the outlet port stem, as there is another spring and small poppet inside of the pump body. Turn the pump over slowly to remove the spring and poppet from the body of the pump. Now we can inspect the poppet to make sure there's no damage to the O-ring seals or the poppet itself, and also take a look at the spring. If the spring has any damage, set this one to the side and use a new one from the QTHP Replacement Parts Kit. Also, it's a good idea to apply a light bit of lubricant to these O-ring seals on the poppet. Now we can install the poppet back into the pump body, and we can install the spring on top of the poppet. Again, make sure the spring is standing straight up on the poppet. You may need to adjust this so it is making a secure connection to the center of the poppet. Making sure the spring is upright, we can reinstall the gauge stem into the pump body. Snug up the outlet port with the 1/2" wrench. Again, just snug enough to have a connection to the pump body. Next, we'll reinstall the reservoir back onto the pump body. First, we'll apply some light lubricant or grease to this large O-ring and slowly twist this reservoir back onto the pump body. This will avoid damaging the O-ring seal on the bottom of the pump. Next, we'll install the top of the reservoir. Start by applying some light lubricant or grease to this O-ring seal, and then press and twist the lid onto the top of the reservoir. Gently pressing and twisting will avoid any damage to this top O-ring seal. Next, we'll put the washer and nut back on the top of our outlet port and snug it up with the 5/8" wrench. No need to over-tighten this, as over-tightening could damage this top O-ring. Put the cap and chain back on and replace the vent plug. After the pump is assembled, we can apply some pressure and ensure all of the O-rings and check valves are functioning as intended. If our pump is still losing pressure, the next thing we can take a look at is our fine adjust valve. To replace the fine adjust, we'll need a 1/2 inch wrench and loosen the fine adjust. Here we can inspect the O-ring seals on the fine adjust piston. Ensure there's no dust or debris around this O-ring seal, and if there's any damage, set this one aside and pick up a new O-ring seal from the QTHP Replacement Parts Kit. It's also a good idea to apply a light bit of lubricant to these O-ring seals before installing back into the pump body. Again, with our 1/2 inch wrench, we can secure this to the pump body, not over tightening, but just enough to engage those O-ring seals. Next, we can inspect the fine adjust piston. Start by using a 1/2 inch wrench. Now we can inspect the fine adjust piston and make sure that all of these components are free of any dust or debris and that the bronze bonnet is actually secure and there's no dust or debris inside of this housing. Make sure that there is a light bit of grease or lubricant applied here. And if any of these seals or O-rings are damaged, set them aside and pick up a new set from the QTHP Replacement Parts Kit. After visually inspecting the fine adjust piston, we can now insert it back into the pump body. Using our 1/2 inch wrench, we can snug up our fine adjust piston enough to engage those O-ring seals, but not tight enough to damage them. If your pump is still not holding pressure, next we can inspect the bleed valve. To replace the bleed valve, we'll need a 1/2 inch wrench to remove the bleed valve from the pump. Inspect the O-ring seals and ensure they're clear of any dust or debris. If the O-ring seals need to be replaced, set these aside and get a fresh set from the QTHP Replacement Parts Kit. Apply some light industrial oil to these seals and reinstall back into the bleed valve on the pump body. Using our 1/2 inch wrench, we can snug up our bleed valve, and next we can check our bleed valve connection to our pump body. Again, using our 1/2 inch wrench, we can remove this brass housing here. Be careful when removing this, as there is a steel ball bearing inside of the valve that is very easy to lose if you're out in the field. Make sure this ball bearing is clear of any dust or debris, and also make sure the O-ring seals are clear of any dust or debris or damage. Again, if this O-ring seal is damaged, put this one aside and pick up a new one from the QTHP Replacement Parts Kit. Apply a light bit of lubricant and reinstall the ball bearing and housing back into the QTHP pump. It's also important to inspect the valve seat where the ball bearing seats inside of the pump to make sure there's no damage to the pump body. Using our 1/2 inch wrench, we can tighten the bleed valve back onto the pump body. Make sure it's threaded all the way counterclockwise so you don't crush the seal while tightening the valve. To disassemble and replace the pumping piston O-ring and backup ring, we'll need to remove the handle assembly. First, we'll remove the 4 bolts on the bottom of the pump using a 5/32 or 24mm Allen wrench. After removing the 4 screws from the bottom of the pump, remove the handles from the pump body. First, we'll inspect the piston, squeeze the handles together, and here is the piston with the white backup ring and black O-ring. Inspect these seals for damage and, if necessary, replace them with new ones from the QTHP Replacement Parts Kit. Make sure these seals have a small amount of lubricant applied, and next we can move on to the piston cylinder. Here we have the piston cylinder. Make sure to inspect these O-ring seals to make sure that there is no dust or debris around here, and if there is any damage, set them aside and pick up new ones from the QTHP Replacement Parts Kit. Make sure the piston cylinder has a light amount of lubricant applied to these seals, and then we can reinstall back into the pump body. Next, we'll reinstall the handles back into the pump body, and we'll use the 4 screws along with our 5/32 or 24mm Allen wrench. To learn more about how to prime the QTHP and perform a test on a system, check out our operation video. For more information on our hydraulic hand pumps and other products, check out our website at ralstonInst.com.